everybody. Welcome to Graphic Policy Radio. This is your host, Ilana Levin, aka Ilana Brooklyn. And joining me tonight is a guest who I've had on the show before, but who hasn't been on for a really long time. And I'm really looking forward to catching up with her. And that is Alex de Campi.
Hey, Ilana.
Hey.
Really happy to see you. Well, not see you. Yeah. I'm happy to hear you.
Yeah. It's funny because we were like, I don't want to be on video. I'm like, it's okay. We can't be on video. But now I'm sad that we're not on video because it would be nice to see you. It's true. For those who aren't familiar with her work, get your act together. Here's the short bio. Alex de Campi is a thriller writer with an extensive backlist of critically acclaimed graphic novels, including Eisner-nominated heist noir Bad Girls. Her most recent books were pulp horror graphic novel Dracula, Motherfucker from Image Comics, sci-fi thriller Madi, Once Upon a Time in the Future, co-written with Duncan Jones, and True War Stories, an anthology of soldiers' deployment tales. She's also released her debut prose novel, The Scottish Boy, from Unbound in May 2020. This year, her second novel, Heartbreak Incorporated, comes out, as does YA graphic novel, The Backups from First Second. Catch her action thriller, Bad Karma, serialized on Panel Syndicate. She also writes for TV and film, including Toonami's upcoming Blade Runner anime and more. She is on most social media as Alex de Campi, with an E. She lives in New York City with her kid, a dog, and a cat. Welcome back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
And it has been a year. Like, you have been putting out great quantities of content. Yeah, some of our listeners might not know that you don't only write, you also letter your comics.
Yeah, I'm probably one of the few non-cartoonist letterers. I mean, cartoonists who write and draw, and they usually letter their own work.
Right.
There are a couple of others around, but I started doing it just simply in the early days with Valentine. I didn't have any money to pay anyone. And I wasn't going to ask someone to letter this massive thing for free because I'm not a jerk. And so I figured out how to do it on my own. And I've carried on doing it on my own because now it's become part of my process. I know just how much finessing and design work I do directly on the art to fix past dialogue problems, to do things better, to make the sound effects really sort of bed in nicely to the art. There's just so much work I do when the page is actually in front of me in Adobe Illustrator that I just couldn't do if I handed it off to someone else. And there are wonderful letters in comics. I mean, there's so many great ones. I'm kind of a mediocre one, but I can't let go because how would I tell, Taylor Esposito, like who's a great guy, or Simon Boland, or like or Jim Campbell, or any of the other great letterers. Like, how could I communicate that? Like, oh well, actually, I'm going to randomly add a sound effect in there, but I'm going to take this one away. But it should be like that. Like, it's just it would be such a nightmare. Making the lettering script would take me as long as just lettering the book at this point.
Right, because your thoughts about what it should do are that complicated at this point. Yeah. It's that much
fun. I enjoy it. It's a very zen process. When my brain was really dying in like August, September, October, I was just lettering books, and it was such a nice thing to do because it was very visual and kind of relaxing rather than creating the story from whole cloth. I was just like doing the final embroidery on the story.
Bill Sienkiewicz, and he was saying that he likes getting hired to do inks sometimes when he just wants someone to hire him for his hands. I was like, dude, well, I'm glad that you like doing inks because you're the best. But,
yeah, really.
But I feel like I'm not saying I could like pick your lettering, out of the dark myself, but I feel like there is a sort of sense that I get to it now, then I recognize it. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, I use about 4 balloon fonts. All the balloons are hand drawn, so they're just a little bit more organic, which works well with most of the art. And there's just all the sound effects are these like very non-comics font sound effect fonts. They're just, standard, like slightly grunge sans serif stuff. It varies from book to book. One of the first things I do when I start lettering a book is figuring out what the balloon font is. And that kind of tells me a lot. That encompasses dialogue font, encompasses a lot of how I feel about the book and the look I'm trying to get. And then establish a few sound effect fonts that I'll use throughout the book. One of the challenges with Madi was because we had some very, very different artists on there, was almost picking an individual style for each artist. I used one balloon dialogue font most of the way through. Changed it for Simon Bisley because it's Biz, and you need something a little more like with a little more honfa to it than, you know, good old basic Moritat, which is one of my favorite Comic Craft fonts. But, you know, lean very heavy on Beebus New as a sound effect font for Dylan Teague, but then was using like Hitchcock for Lorenz. And gosh, what was I using for like James Stokoe? I can't even remember. Anywho, I used a lot of brush fonts because it worked really well with her art style. You know, so each artist had their own little subgrouping of sound effect fonts that worked well with their art style and could meld into their pages nicely. And that's a really important consideration for me as I do my work.
And there's a lot of sound effects
this weird
in that
striving
book.
to be invisible, and like that's something that's always been there in my work. I'm trying to disappear. Which, you know, I think you see that also. Well, with Madi, you know, I was essentially helping bring someone else's story, fully realized story, to comics. And Duncan was a great collaborator and let me change a bunch of stuff, like fairly minor stuff. But, you know, I had a lot of creative freedom that I might not have had with another person. And with True War Stories, that was a book where I truly disappeared because I didn't write a single story. I adapted about half of them, but I didn't write any of the stories. But my hand is everywhere in that, but it's also nowhere.
Oh, yeah. So explain to our listeners about True War Stories, like what that process was, what that book is doing, because it's really impressive and kind of amazing that I don't think anybody had quite done a project like that before.
It's a graphic novel anthology of autobiographical stories of U.S. service members abroad on deployment. And that deployment can be to a war zone and it can be to a beach in the Philippines. Both happened. It's, you know, I have a lot of friends in the military, and both in the British and the American military, and a lot of veteran friends. And, you know, you sit around, like you hang out with people in the military and veterans long enough, and you hear stories, and they're not the stories you think you're going to hear. It's not like fucking Extraction, you know, like I'm a white guy and I shoot brown people and that's entertainment. No. It's usually like dumb stuff. It's, you know, having diarrhea in the middle of a desert and like what to do, or, you know, something went wrong with the tank and it was exciting. They're usually very self-depreciating, very funny, dry stories about just the weirdness of military life. And in telling the stories, some of them are trying to process that. But we don't see those stories outside of people who are connected to the military in some way. You know, most stories of service members are in some way propaganda. When they're presented, they're either presented for patriotism or they're presented to show that involvement in the military is a bad thing or something. Very, very little do soldiers simply just get to tell their stories in a public forum the way they tell their stories in a bar. And that's all we were trying to do. Like I reached out to a bunch of people, some old friends, some new, with my co-editor, Kai Krumpar, who's a Iraqi war veteran herself, 10 years, mostly in military intelligence. She disabled. She has a TBI. So we reached out to our friends and just said, do you have a story to tell? And can you, and it's up to you to choose what story you tell. Like you just have to give us a couple of sentences so we can approve it, just to make sure it fits in and we think it's a good story. And then you tell it in any way you want. You can try to write a comic script and we'll work with you on teaching you how to write a comic script. You can write it in the body of an email like one person did. You can write it on a Word doc. You can make it really nice with like photo ref in there. And people did all sorts of things. And we turned all of them, with Kai adapting about half of them and I'm adapting the other half, into these comic stories that range from 6 pages to, I think our longest is like 26 pages. And whatever you think this anthology is, it's just not. It's kind of like Humans of New York, but like Humans of Uniform. You know, the first story is a very, sort of traditional Afghan foiling a bomb attempt story. The next story is and also foiling a bomb attempt against the base story, but it's a Vietnam story and nobody wears shirts and they're all smoking weed. And then there's a trans soldier's story. There's stories about running into your interpreter from Iraq years later in another situation, a guy that you thought was probably going to get killed when you left at some point because it was such a dangerous job. It's just, there are these wonderfully, there's a story in there called Brothers about finishing a really hairy deployment in Afghanistan and then meeting the half brother that you like never really knew because he was older and, your mom remarried and stuff. And it's one of the most all-encompassing and most heartfelt and interesting stories about just family life that I've ever read. And it's incredibly nuanced and it says so much in its short. It's like one of the best comic stories I've ever seen. And this is by a guy who's never written a comic story before. And we worked with our authors. We paid all our authors because we're not assholes. That's why the book took me 3 years to get out because I couldn't find anyone willing to give me an advance except Z2 to pay people for their art. Even though it's a charity book, the contributors should be paid. And a lot of these folks are interested in writing careers. And the fastest way that you convince somebody that they have validity as a professional writer is to pay them for their writing. And so we did that. And we kept in touch with everybody, throughout the process. They had checks over everything, from, when we adapted to script to, pencils and line art and colors. And that was really important because there's a lot of detail in military stories. And Kai could pick a lot of things up, but that I couldn't because I'm, pure civilian. And people were very generous with photo ref and just, it was a really wonderful collaborative experience bringing these stories to life. And, I've been involved in a lot of anthologies and I've read a lot of anthologies, and this one, like the strength of the stories, strength and variety of the stories throughout it is really just, Kai and I kept messaging each other. We're like, we can't believe it's so good. Like it's all like, they're all good. They're all really, really good. And we're just really proud of it. It's out now in comic book shops and from the Z2 website. And it was a Kickstarter. And you can get it in shops properly in March. If you want it now, Z2 website, it's in the warehouse. You can buy it for your dad.
Yeah,
I joke that it's like the best dad gift of the season, but I'm also not joking. I'm apparently I'm the comics dad friend who makes the dad books.
I love it. There's definitely a consistent theme through a lot of the work you've done has been with stories with veterans and talking about the nature of their lives when they get back as well.
Well, with Bad Karma, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm obsessed with Bad Karma.
I'm really pleased because a lot of people, it's hard to get notice for digital comics. I was really sad because Brian Vaughan did this big thing when Ed Brubaker put his comic out about it launching on Panel Syndicate. And then he did this big thing with Donny Cates. And I'm like, I am your only female writer. Like, you could maybe say something about me? Like, just maybe? Nah, it's okay. But yeah.
Right. I wrote a review for Graphic Policy of Bad Karma, and it's like the only thing I wrote during the election cycle, basically, because I was like, had so many feelings. I want to finish talking about true war stories before I talk about Bad Karma, because if I just talk about Bad Karma, we're not going to talk about anything else. But
okay.
With true war stories, one of the things I loved was the story from the Jewish soldier, and the way he connected with the other Jewish soldier there, who was in who had been injured.
Yeah.
And that story just really got me.
And Sam Hart, we specifically were looking for a Jewish Jewish line artist, because there were parts of the Shabbos service that I never would have been able to explain as a goy to the right to do correctly. And I wasn't going to put all that on Benari. And Sam Hart raised his hand and said, I'm Jewish. And then he sent designs back and he's like, well, I want to lay out some of these pages like a page of the Torah. And we were like, that's brilliant. So
yeah.
Finding people, like we made a real effort, the artist who drew our trans soldier story is non-binary themselves. We made a real effort to just create little teams of people who would like each other and would get along in a way, and would feel comfortable with each other. It was really important to me, like the comfort and of my writers and our support of them was like my primary consideration throughout this whole thing. It had to be a good experience for them. They had to be supported. That was it.
The story that was from the trans soldier, I know a lot of queer people who were in the military, especially, including trans people. And when I saw that first page with the POV character being depicted as a bird, I knew, I was like, oh, okay, this is definitely going to be a story about, this is how you're going to be handling the person, pre-transition. And the very end of her story, when she's able to like live the life she wants to, is when she's finally drawn as a person. And I thought that was like really beautifully done. But also like her whole story of her period of time of deployment is like,
it's hilarious. It's really funny. Like she's a funny writer, and there's so much that isn't just, there's a lot of it that's about being trans, but she does a really good job about explaining, what it was like to be trans in the military, but also there's so much in there that's just about being in the military as a person, that's just funny. And we obviously were looking, we had a long talk specifically about that story with Annie, with the author, and with Kai. And I was like, please look at Goodnight, pun. So, and we were, we wanted to not show something that might be triggering to people or to her in terms of her pre-transition self. And that's why we thought of the eagle, because obviously the eagle is obviously a symbol of the Air Force, and the bald eagle is one of the few birds with non-gendered plumage.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Also pigeons.
Yes. We weren't going to draw Annie as a pigeon. She's an eagle. She's not a pigeon.
I love it. I thought it was really well done. And also just the whole period in time in which she served is like, like the people serving pre-Iraq and like post Soviet Union. That's when a lot of my peers were in. And they were older than me, but we were still friends from the goth scene, basically.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of like, oh yeah, all that random ass shit in Germany and like getting your hand broken and nobody fucking actually listens to you. This is all like, yes, this is why I would never in a million years have been able to like live like that. And the stories are so powerful. I mean, one of the other things that's just so great is like the range of the kind of experiences that people have had in there, and just really the diversity, because I hate how military history gets talked about as like this strictly male domain. And obviously, you're a writer who's done tons of work in stories around soldiers, like consistently through her career. And, like you're doing them yourself because that's how you're going to be able to tell those stories, because, like, you're not a man. So like, clearly you could have nothing possible to say on this topic.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun coming at those stories from the outside, on the fictional side, because, there are a lot of tropes that a lot of men just accept, that I feel especially have come to light for a lot more people of privilege during this year because of the protests. That stories about white guys running around with guns have to be handled could be handled a lot more carefully, or possibly just not written at all right now. Like a friend of mine was saying he's going to write sort of a John Wick style thing, and I'm like, oh, please don't, just not. I mean, we've seen a lot of this in Chinese cinema, where the emphasis is changing from And this is partially government led in China, but it's also, I think, partially just everyone is very tired of 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 people with privilege with guns being able to do the violence and not have any real repercussions on themselves. And so you're seeing a lot of Chinese films with the main characters being emergency response teams or, teams sent in to like rebuild a place or like, disaster response teams, not, spies or vigilante type stories. I think there's a lot more to be done. I mean, going over to Bad Karma for a minute, one of the conceits of Bad Karma is these guys are not the infallible, like really strong heroes whose only sadness is their wife was killed. And therefore their role now is to avenge the dead wife. The wife is still alive. She divorced Ethan's dumbass because Ethan is
as would anyone reasonable.
Should divorce Ethan. Do not marry Ethan. He has a lot of shit to work out, and he's never going to do that. So our anti-heroes are properly anti-heroes. They're both disabled, and they're trying throughout the entire book to not kill people. That's like they're not like, we got to break in and shoot everyone. They're like, how do we do this while not actually harming anyone via the skills that we have? And that was just so much fun. As like it just makes me a lot more invested in the story rather than having to write lots of people getting killed, which I think we've had enough of in 2020.
For those who aren't familiar with Bad Karma, it's an action story about two military veterans who have both been, abused and abandoned by the government, who realize that a young black man is about to be killed for an assassination that they committed. Like he was the person who was arrested and found guilty of the crime, but they know that they did it, and they want to get him off because he's innocent, and discover that there's a whole system around keeping this young black man as the fall guy for the military industrial complex. And it's an action story. It's also very funny in times, like just really character driven, and just truly a pleasure to read. And I was lucky enough to read the full script way back in the day, so I know what's happening. And I'm not going to give any of that away, but these are such wonderfully written characters. It's so important that the wife is not like a nag and everyone hates her. She's like the ex-wife, and you know why she's the ex-wife, and she's trying, and she has her own sense of humor and agency. And the relationship between the two main character guys is like really rich and complex and wonderful. And
Cheryl's really fun to write. Cheryl's another one where like women in action movies are either there to be rescued or they are successful. They're hot, but they're successful doing things in a male way. Like they're hot and they seduce, but they can like fight and shoot and kick and stuff like that. And one of I don't feel it progresses the cause of women to have the only women characters presented as equal when they're essentially presented as having male characteristics. I mean, gender roles are bullshit anyway. Like they're a societal construct. But if we only say like woman main character good when woman main character could actually be like man with a boob, no. Like I think we have to value other experiences of the feminine, because we're not really valuing women as main characters when they're interchangeable with male characters with a boob job. And so one of the things I really tried to do with Cheryl, who's the ex-wife character, who I love, she has a realistic, I tried to make her relationship with Ethan really realistic. Like they can set each other off in a hot second. Like they can walk into the room and be yelling at each other in like, they know all each other's shortcuts basically. But also there is like, they had 2 kids, they spent a lot of time together. So there is kind of a baseline level of affection. So as well as the shortcuts to getting each other angry, they're able to communicate in other ways and shortcuts as well. They're you know, Cheryl makes a joke about like a card that says I love my army wife on it, and like you can tell it's probably a joke that they've been making for 15 years to each other.
Right.
But she doesn't, the boys are the ones with the shoot, fight skills, and she has a lot of other skills that complement them, but she's never magically going to pull out a gun and it turns out she's as good a sniper as Sully. Like that would just be wild. That would be dumb. She runs that show in a very real way. Like she absolutely runs those boys. And yeah, and you have the feeling she's run them since they were like 15 years old. She's just been that person. And it's just wonderful for me to let her be, this person who cares about her appearance, but she spends the entire book in like yoga pants and a push-up bra and a Patriots hoodie, because that's who she is. And she's just like she's just feels like a kind of a normal person caught up in this, and I really like that. I don't tend to write a lot of traditional female heroes because I'm bored with the way they're expressed so often.
Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to writing these like stories with male protagonists, as you and I have often discussed, women are never given a platform to do that unless we create the platform ourselves, basically.
Yeah, we're not going to get asked. There's no one's going to be like, hey,
And just shouting out to Dee Cunniffe, right?
Dee Cunniffe and Ryan Howe are the art team. Ryan's the line artist. Dee is the color artist. They are absolutely fantastic. I mean, Ryan, a lot of the book is very, some of the book is very broad. There's a lot of broad action, but there's also a lot of subtle reaction shots, where you're looking at the change of emotion on someone's face and and their body language. And these are like two disabled characters. So, and they have very different physicalities. I mean, Ethan has a lot of limitations on his physicality. He's got a below the knee amputation on his left leg, and a lot of mobility challenges otherwise, because of an explosion that we never actually flash back to because it's not about the trauma. It's about coping with the trauma. And we want to keep it more, people can imagine their own trauma within that if we don't specify exactly what their trauma was. But it's pretty obvious to figure out the broad strokes of what happened. And Ryan's been so good on the little details, like stuff like, Ethan's shoes never have laces. They have the Velcro tabs because his fingers can't do laces. Like, we've talked through a lot of this. And Ryan's done some really stunning work on his own. And Dee just makes it all look so elegant with his colors. Like I'm so blessed to have them on the team. If you're interested in Bad Karma, it's pay as you like. You can actually take it for free. Like, this is a shitty year. It's fine. You can put 0. We never find out. It's on Panel Syndicate along with a lot of other cool comics. And there are 3 chapters out now, which is over 100 pages of comic. And we're just finishing chapter 4. It'll be out like probably first or second week of January.
And I really love it, as you know. So and folks, what I was going to say is like, this is burying this deep in in the podcast where I say this, but I think sometimes there's web comics and the art is sort of graded on a curve. I am not grading this art on a curve. It's really excellent. It is just as detailed and complex as you could possibly want in as for a story. So even if you're normally like web comics, like no, you should absolutely read this. It's really gorgeous and excellent. And speaking of gorgeous and excellent, jumping from stories of soldiers to stories of Dracula, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about Dracula, motherfucker, which is an exploitation horror fantasy story that you and the wonderful Erica Henderson put out this just recently, a graphic novel. And it's very imaginative. And I love like you and Erica working together on a super psychedelic horror story. Tell me how that project came together.
I had a bunch of I actually wrote it like almost 2 years ago. just, I think I'd actually just finished writing Bad Karma, which is 275 pages. It will eventually see print, by the way, in a giant doorstop edition once we're all done, 7 chapters.
Nice.
I finished writing something else as well, and I just had been doing all these long books, and I thought I just want to do something short and fun. And so, I did all my Grindhouse books in like 2015 and 2016 with Dark Horse. Sorry, I'm watching my pit bull get down very carefully on the chest next to the table, next to the bed, past the laptop that's propped there. Good boy. I just want to do something fun. I've always loved exploitation stories and exploitation cinema. And I'd done a whole series with Dark Horse called Grindhouse a while ago that did very well. And I really liked the kind of 48 to 64 page length. And then I was watching Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips put out these really cool 72 page hardbacks through Image. And I thought I would love to do something in that format because you can mail it places, like you can order it from a bookstore very easily. It racks spine out. It's, and it's short enough that an artist can take on a 72 page project without it being like this awful burden, especially if it's on an Image, no advance deal. I know some people get advances at Image. I don't get an advance at Image. So I wrote it, and then it was someone else was supposed to draw it, and they didn't. And then they finally said, "I'm just too tied up on other things." And I said, "Fine, still someone who's still a close friend. Like it's not a big deal. This stuff happens all the time." And then I messaged Erica because I thought Erica loves horror, and I knew her style could do a lot more than most people had pigeonholed her to do via Squirrel Girl. And honestly, if you can do comedy, you can do horror because they're the same thing, really, at the root of it. And she read over it, and she normally develops scripts with people, so this was weird to ask her to look at something that was all finished. She read over it, and the same day, she's like, "Yes, we're doing this." And she finished it quite early on in the year, which was good considering of all the other books I had due. I lettered it. We put it out, and it was just. There were a lot of vampire books this year, and everyone sort of seems to be talking about ours, and that makes me really happy in a way, because I feel like we'd really gone in and re-examined what Dracula meant in a way, and how to portray Dracula. So it was a much more deep, yes, it's a book called Dracula Motherfucker that's a 72 page pulp noir romp, okay? Let's not dress it up too much. It is a fun book. But underneath it all, Erica and I had actually spent quite a lot of time thinking about how to express Dracula in a way that was terrifying, and not in some musty velvet tuxedo that just looks like it smells like mothballs. And how we could do something interesting with it, just have something to say rather than just putting out a story because vampires are cool.
Right.
I think we were trying to make vampires uncool in a way.
And the designs, Erica did, again, folks, this Erica Henderson, who you know from Squirrel Girl, and she's doing these amazing, amazing monster designs throughout the book that are super psychedelic. So, of course, I'm way into it. And then also getting the costuming right, the different time periods costuming.
Oh yeah, Erica's big on research, and I am too, of course. So we were emailing. She was mostly in charge of the setting and the costuming. The Dracula design we talked a lot about, she and I, because I came in with very specific ideas of the shadows and the eyes and stuff, and the incorporality of him. And we sort of pinned the whole book around the aesthetics of super flat art, which encompasses both Gustav Klimt, which is why we started in Vienna, also because I just love talking about the Meyerling incident because it's wild, and op art and psychedelic art. We were, referencing, the sort of the wax light show psychedelic art of the late 60s, early 70s in the book. We were referencing Peter Max, Bridget Riley in places, there was a lot of experimenting with 2D as a concept of flattening things out So much of comics is trying to look like movies and give things depth and stuff, and like fake blur, and like we're just like, no, we're going to make it really, really flat and decorative. Because I love the way in art like Klimt, you have something that's very realistic and then something that's dead flat and doesn't let your eye like cope with it in any other way other than as a block of flat design. And there's a lot of anime
flat,
influence
and
as
I
well.
love decorative. So that's like, these are good choices.
Yeah. And we were influenced by some of the stuff, and there's an anime called Madoka Magica, where it's kind of like a deconstruction of the magical girl trope. It's really wonderful. And when they go to fight witches in this really weird, like Japanese super flat 2D art environment that's incredibly like postmodern and aggressive in a way that you wouldn't expect a cute anime about magical girls to be. And it's like really, really fine art led. And I was like, I just saw that and I was like, wow, like this is just such a cool way of doing things. And a lot of the design of Dracula was based on some of the transmorphing monster design from some horror anime. Pride in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, parts of Hellsing where Alucard goes sort of incorporeal, and on and on.
And I like that the character who's being pursued by Dracula and vampires through a lot of this is, a man, right? He's a man and he's a photojournalist, and
yeah, exactly.
It changes the dynamic of the story a lot.
Dracula and gender, like vampires and gender, is a really, really interesting discussion. It stands for so much. I mean, the original Bram Stoker Dracula was an urban sexual predator who took women against their will. And there's a whole bunch of Victorian stuff built into that. Lucy Westenra, Mina Harker, both taken against their will. Lucy, the original, like, I'm too sexy girl who gets nailed first. Thereby starting a great horror film tradition. Get your kid off, you're going to die. And I wasn't really interested in Dracula taking people against their will, because there's a lot of the way Dracula stories relate to women constantly invalidate women's agency and choices, in that they're either taken against their will, too bad for them, so they exist to be victims, or Dracula is very, very handsome and they fall in love with him despite the fact that and somehow not seeing that he's a monster because he's handsome. And that also it doesn't necessarily, it gives them a surface choice, but it invalidates their intelligence as rational human beings,
Right.
So, and yes, there's a whole separate conversation about something like Twilight and the idea of YA vampires and sexual penetration as a metaphor. We're not going to go into that right now. There's like dissertations on it. It's great. So what we were interested in with this Dracula was the brides, who have never been really well written or explained. They're just there in negligees in any form of Dracula. Like they just why are they there? What are they doing? Why does he have the brides? Why is he getting more brides? It just, none of it makes any sense. So I kind of came into this going let's make these chicks in negligees work. And let's give them a reason for being, and let's give them a reason for having made the choice. Let's make it an active choice that they decided to go with Dracula, who is not attractive. Like, the petty hill that I will die on is that Dracula should not be hot. Dracula is ugly and terrifying and gross. That's it. He can mesmerize you, but it's not a long-term thing. He's not gonna, he can convince you to do things short term, usually to your own detriment and rapid demise, but he's not going, you're not going to be like, oh, he's so handsome, I'm so glad, he looks like Brad Pitt, I can live with him forever. No. He's ancient, he's gross. Because if you look at the men in our world that wield tremendous money and power, none of them are hot, okay? None of them. Jack Dorsey, not hot. Donald Trump, not hot. Married several models. Harvey Weinstein,
I forgot to say Harvey Weinstein is exactly the right mode for this.
And who married the gal who ran the fashion company Marchesa, and then we saw all the Hollywood starlets wearing Marchesa for 5 years, and then they divorced. No more Marchesa. Um, why was she there? Like, if genuinely she looked at Harvey Weinstein, I forget her name, which is terrible. If she genuinely looked at Harvey Weinstein and thought, he's so handsome, I'm so sexually attracted to him, this is all I've ever wanted, is a man who looks like Jabba the Hutt, like, good for her, I don't kink shame. If that revs your engines, baby, like, good for you. I somehow doubt it, however. So there was an active choice that many women have historically made to tie themselves to a man who is not necessarily what they would choose for themselves in a world of ultimate possibility, because of that man's wealth and or power. And these were the women whose stories I was interested in telling, because what do you do once you've married Harvey, once you've married the Donald, and you've got the money? Like, look how happy Melania looks. That was sarcasm.
Yes.
Like, faking the orgasms for the rest of your life, or doing exactly what they want you to do, but you can have all the Chanel you can carry. Like, when does it stop working? At what point do you decide it's over? And also, there's a lot of command and control in this as well. And I'm a survivor of an abusive, emotionally abusive, and occasionally physically abusive relationship. So I know very much when you leave a controlling relationship where you're isolated and you are given a pattern of behavior that you have to do in order to, if you execute it correctly, if you do the dance correctly, you assume you'll get back to the place at the beginning when the person was love bombing you and showing you a lot of affection. And spoiler, you won't. You never will. It's over. It's done. You'll be a disappointment forever. But while you're doing that dance, like, when you then make a decision to leave, you become the monster. And I guarantee you this: if you speak to trauma survivors, if you speak to abuse survivors, there is a period where they very definitely were treated like a monster by the person that they were leaving, possibly by friends and family who have occasionally been stunningly not understanding in these sort of scenarios. That they had to go through being the bad guy for a while to survive, to leave. And that's why many people don't leave, is because you are suddenly the bad guy if you do. And when you've been conditioned to be pleasing someone with a volatile temper, and conditioned to follow irrational rules of behavior in order to try to get crumbs of affection, then you're very unlikely to be in the mental state where you're able to choose to be the bad guy for the significant amount of upheaval that it takes to leave somebody. And so all of this went into my and Erica's little pulp noir extravaganza. So in many ways, it was a metaphor for abusive relationships and male privilege and power, and how it's often built on the backs of women. Because, obviously, like, how many men could do what they are doing if they had to take care of the kids, or if they were single fathers? And yes, there are single fathers doing amazing things. Yes, I know many men who have been the abused party in an abusive relationship. I'm not invalidating their issues or their pain. I'm coming at it as a female abuse survivor and writing my understanding of the story. So yeah, that's my cheerful Dracula story. And wildly, it is cheerful. Like, I think, sometimes the best way to write about something painful is to write about it in a genre fashion that talks about it but doesn't talk about it directly. I mean, we're all very, very tired this year. I don't want to read stories about real life. I don't want to see Marriage Story, the film. I've been divorced twice. I know how divorces work. I don't want to see that movie. Right. I don't want to see filmmakers or storytellers trying to convince me that life is real and life is earnest. Like, I know.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like that's one of the reasons that genre is so much fun. Um, and we are able to like talk and have things that are serious, but it isn't necessarily the same amount of emotional drain that it would be to do something like read or watch Marriage Story. Yeah.
Yeah. Or the distancing lens of history, or the distancing lens of like science fiction, when you can talk about things without talking about them.
Yep. Absolutely. Agree. And just like the combination of the different settings for this story are just a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are lots of little Easter eggs. The address he gives is the house in Sunset Boulevard. When he eventually, Erica borrows a costume from Mask of the Red Death.
I fucking enjoy that movie, so that was really cool to see.
Yeah, there's lots of like little things we sprinkled in there for fun. There's a like a quick little Showgirls reference. So we love us
that I might not have caught.
There's one panel when the younger bride is stepping out of Dracula's shadows. That is basically the Showgirls poster, because we're bad people.
Love it. That's fun.
I mean, you got to amuse yourself.
People,
like, there's a lot of my scripts
people.
are letters to the artist, and and there's often a lot of like jokes and stuff in there. And Erica's great about taking those jokes and just running with them, and then adding a bunch of her own. It was really fun to do a project just with one other person too, because we just kept trading the pages back and forth, and she'd trade me her color sketches, I'd letter on them, draft some lettering. She'd then want to draw in the sound effects rather than using my fonts, so she'd draw on top of my fonts and then give them back to me. So it was this real like just fun little system.
I would love to see you guys do work together in the future as well.
Me too. Someone can pay us though.
Yes, they should pay you guys to do it. They should pay you guys to do a lot of things also. Pro tip. Well, I feel like I didn't really do as much conversation around Madi as we should, and also realized that, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Madi. Short for you.
Okay, because it's short for Madi. Yeah. So that is your new, very British, very sci-fi book with just like a whole host of a who's who of amazing artists, including like Simon Beasley.
Yep. Who was filling in for someone who dropped out. Simon Bisley and Glenn Fabry were folks that we actually contacted fairly late in the game, because we had younger artists in there who decided they didn't want to take notes.
Wow. That seems like a poor professional choice they made there.
Well, it's comics. Like, sometimes that happens, but we had a lot of fun. Duncan and I had a tremendous amount of fun drawing up that artist list, because we felt it was very much like artists. Like it's not necessarily people who were super flashy, but people who were just amazing storytellers and had amazing graphic eyes, and were very different from each other, because we wanted there to feel like there was a difference and a progression through the book, that not like, oh, well, is this, if people are going, oh, is it this artist again? We want that to be like a thematic reason that we're like, that this artist is then doing a callback to the scene, rather than having two artists who looked a lot alike. And everybody was lovely to work with. I mean, except for, the two that very early on were like, no, we shall not take your notes. I mean, I'm great friends with Glenn and his partner Karen now. I'm probably going to go to his birthday party in the spring, providing travel is okay and we're all vaccinated. Simon Bisley's charming and very sweet to work with. Everybody was a delight. I mean, it was great working with David Lopez again. He's such a nice guy. Annie Wu's just a genius.
Yeah.
Tanchi Zonchek is one of my all-time favorite artists. There's a man who just needs to get paid, like, just to draw whatever he wants to do of his own stories. He's so good.
I don't know if I'm familiar with his work. Who is this again?
Tanchi Zonchek. I will send you his Twitter handle later. He's doing like a Dark Horse Skull Boy book or something with Jeff Lemire. He's done a bunch of, like, he's an incredible artist who gets high. He does a lot of costume design stuff. He was on the Rogue One design team as well, I think, with like Chris Weston and a lot of other people. Chris Weston, another Madi artist, another great guy. And then he always gets hired to do these really, really forgettable, like, Dark Horse type books that, like, I mean, the scripts are fine, but he's so good. Like, he's just so on a different level from everybody else that I just want to see him do his own thing in the way that, like, the Immonens now have the freedom to go off and do their own thing. He's very, like, Stuart and Kathy Immonen level of art. He's that guy.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, I thought the art in this book looked so amazing. And what's also cool about it is with these range of artists for the different parts of the story, it all kind of felt like very in line with all of the great sort of British anthology style comics, even though it is telling one holistic story.
Yeah, I mean, that was a editorial choice largely driven by me, because Duncan was doing a graphic novel of Mute with Glenn that, like, kind of got slightly mishandled at Dark Horse, and, like, the book never got finished, and then the film came out, and so the book kind of died, and so we wanted to turn this book around faster than normal for a 250-page book, which meant that waiting for one artist to be ready to do all of it, like, we would have taken at least a year to get on the right person's schedule, because it's a big chunk of time. And then it would have been 2 years to draw. So we chose to break it up between different artists because we could, because it's a road trip film, and so story. So, each artist has a particular location that they're drawing. And B, just so we could get the book out, in the reasonably near future. And from pretty much a standing start, I think we started in April 2019, and the soft cover just came out, and the hardcover and deluxe copies are sitting in Long Beach waiting to be cleared by customs, because everything is slow because of COVID. But if you're interested in buying it, it's out from Z2 Comics, so you can go to the Z2 website. I'd strongly recommend the hardcover version, because it's like 8x12, and that was the original art size, and it's really nice.
Cool. Well, it's interesting because we always talk a lot about, how comics and movies are not the same, and you don't want to you need to, like, respect and embrace each medium for what it's like, about what it's able to do specifically. And this is interesting because this is a comics sequel to things that not a sequel, but it's like existing in the same world, perhaps, that the film existed in. So, like, when you're working on a story that is then coming from cinema, which, is something I guess is also true when you worked on things like even the Predator comics.
Yeah.
How do you make that sort of switch while respecting both mediums?
It's tough. I mean, I think you just have to really love and be interested in the graphic possibilities of the page and the storytelling possibilities of something that's told in pages, where the reader is in control of time, unlike on a film where 5-minute scene is always going to be a 5-minute scene, unless you're a weirdo who has it playing in slow-mo. Unless it's that scene from Basic Instinct, which was a half-second scene, which most young boys turned into a 5-minute scene. The old ones now. The reader takes as long as they're going to take to read a page, so that you can influence that by how you lay out the page. Lots of, like, a 12-panel grid page will make people read slower. A page with a lot of text and a lot of action, turning the page to a splash page or a double page spread gives a great feeling of, like, release, especially if you've had a very boxed up, like, busy page beforehand. Many panels to one panel, it feels like, like, so I think it takes, one of the things we were trying to do with Madi was to really give it a feeling of comics, and do things that you couldn't really do in a film. Be it the different art styles, the call, using art style as callbacks to scenes. Like, there's a very important thematic point that's brought about almost entirely by calling back to other panels that the artist had drawn previously and tweaking them and re-examining them. The script and the film script and the comic script are very, very different in terms of their pacing and and sometimes their content. We looked at the film script as a starting point, and then just took it from there. It's certainly not a, like, let's just put the film script on the page. It was like, let's read this cool story and then turn it into a comics story. And I've been doing, it's been a weird year of that for me, of taking other stories and putting them in comics format, because I was doing it with True War Stories, which was an entirely different operation, because a lot of the True War Stories things, because they're autobiographical, are told with a ton of captions. And I'm normally that writer who, in fiction, if I open your comic and I see it's like pages after pages of just captions, I'm like, nope, write a novel.
Yep.
And here I was, like, being the thing that I don't consider myself. I'm like, I like silence. I like doing things in dialogue. I like avoiding exposition at all possible, to the point where sometimes people feel lost in my work, and I'm trying to get better about that. And there I was, like, doing like this page with like 10 captions on it and very little dialogue, for the autobio stuff. And yeah, I guess it's sometimes you just have to get yourself out of your comfort zone in order to learn as a writer. And working with the autobio stories and putting them into an exciting graphics format, and working with Duncan's screenplay and turning it into something that was absolutely like a comic and does things that only comics can do, were like my big challenges this year. Oh, and Dracula, of course. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it was just, this year was a lot of like getting out of my comfort zone, working with different sorts of stories that I would normally work with, and trying to not make them mine, because I wasn't trying to make Duncan's story mine or the soldiers' stories mine. I was trying to make them the best stories they could be. And my own style, in some ways, what I thought of as my own style, taking a back seat to making the most coolest, effective thing I could. And so using all my skills in the service of something else, which I think is a tremendous lesson for any creator to go through. And it was also really, really fun.
Well, that was an even better answer than I could have hoped for. So thank you for that. So Alex, thank you for joining me again. And
are we actually getting this done in like an exact hour? Are we that good?
Yeah, we're that good. We're that good. So let our listeners know, where's the best place to find your work on the internet?
Well, right now, if you're on Twitter, my pinned tweet is like all my books with buying links. And that is Alex de Campi. I'm pretty much like everywhere on the internet, because I've got this weird Anglo-Italian name, ALEXDECAMPI. At Alex de Campi. You can find me there. Easy way to find all my stuff.
Yeah. I always, when we first met, I was always have to like, is it DE or is it DI? And I would always Google to make sure that I got.
It's DE, which is technically grammatically incorrect, because Campi, meaning fields, is plural. So it should be DI, unless Campi is referring to a specific place, at which point it would be DE. So I'm obviously my family's obviously from some village called Campi.
Well, that is inside. I never was like, I don't know what's supposed to be the difference between these. And
we just like fluffed it on Ellis Island, like
has been known to happen.
Yes.
So again, thank you for coming on, and you can definitely check out all of the good books and upcoming work there. As for my listeners, Graphic Policy Radio continues to chug forward with more interviews with your favorite comics writers and artists. Also on the horizon, I have a few episodes that are going to be about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, because I, like the rest of the internet, we're like, oh my God, we all have to watch DS9 right now. And of course, in true Ilana fashion, I'm turning a source of enjoyment into a source of critical content that I will now share with you. So those things are all on the horizon for you. And you can always reach out to me on Twitter at ELANA_Brooklyn. That's ELANA_Brooklyn. And please leave your reviews of the show on the podcast platforms of your choice. And don't forget to check us out on graphicpolicy.com for your comics news and reviews. And as we like to say, keep it geeky.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.